Welcome to episode 2 of the Chat It Up podcast. If this is your first time joining me, the podcast is a bi-weekly chat about all things Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This week I'm chatting with Dr. Wil Rankinen. He's a born and raised Yooper and a sociolinguist and phonetician who for the last 10 years has been studying the UP dialect. I met Wil about a year ago. He had contacted me in regards to my Y is for Yooper book, and I've kept in contact with him since then. And so he and I have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about in regards to the way Yoopers talk. So without further ado, let's chat it up. All right, we are here with Wil Rankinen, who is an assistant professor at Grand Valley University. Wil, I'm going to just kind of jump right into this here. So it's my understanding you are from Humboldt, and you went to Westwood, correct?
That is correct. My father is originally from Republic area, but both my mom and my dad are originally, they have a farm out in Humboldt, and that's where my brother and I grew up.
So you grew up on a farm. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
It's a hobby farm. So
Okay.
both my parents are laborers by profession. They've now since retired. But my mom was a custodian for the school district, and then my father was a foreman. Sounds like a fancy title, but it really wasn't, on the railroad. He had maybe one or two guys underneath him. Mostly during the summer, but he maintained switches, clean and maintained them, put in new rails, various things like that. Was very much on the railroad most of his career. The farm itself was something that they did in addition to their work, and
Okay.
it was a lot of work. It was
Sure.
a hobby, passion, but a labor of love, so to speak. And so I grew up with horses, cows, chickens, a few pigs when I was much younger.
Sure.
And my mom is a breeder,
Oh,
so she
okay.
breeds dogs as well. So it was a kennel. It is a kennel, as well as a hobby farm.
That's super interesting, and I love that as a starting question as far as what was it like growing up, because your growing up in the UP was much different than my growing up in the UP. And I think that's a theme that we'll kind of keep seeing as you and I continue this conversation of we're the same but different.
Oh, very much so.
Where we'll see a lot of differences along the way. So to jump forward a little bit, so you went to college at Michigan State University, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, people are going to say that I have a Michigan State bias because the first episode of Bugsy, he's also a Michigan State Spartan. People are going to start to think that I'm...
Go green.
Yeah, go white. So you studied English, and you eventually headed to Indiana University for sociolinguistics, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Phonetics and sociolinguistics.
Okay, so for everybody at home, what exactly is that?
So linguistics is, I like to just, let's bring it back. So the field of linguistics is the science of language. I'm a scientist that studies the structure of language. Now, one common question that many linguists get is, how many languages do you speak? Well, I speak several, but that's not really the focus of what linguists do.
Sure.
We examine language at various different levels. For example, the sound levels, what my area of expertise is. One area, but I'm interested in how people pronounce particular words or structures, as well as the patterns in which groups of people produce certain sounds or structures. Whereas the other field of my interest is sociolinguistics, really looking at what are not only individuals doing within a community in terms of using language,
Yeah.
but also how groups of people are sharing certain ways of using language
Okay.
and the differences between different groups. And so the reason why I find that so fascinating is because, like so many things, language is a tool for communication, but also a tool for expression.
I'm not sure.
And Alexa wants to get in on the conversation.
Of course, right? But I mean, that's essentially what I'm really interested in, is the second part, language as a way of self-expression. How does an individual express oneself through the clothes we wear, the choices we make, the things we buy, but also the language, the different ways we use language, and how that is done not only at the individual level but at the group level as well.
Sure. Do you feel like you've kind of always been interested in that, or do you feel like it kind of evolved over time? And the reason why I ask that is, growing up, I was always really into social studies, and so a lot of the things that I'm interested in now, I feel like relate to having that interest in social studies growing up. So I don't know. Again, I don't know if you kind of found that over time, or do you feel like you've always kind of had like an inkling or a desire to kind of like learn more about that?
So I think everybody comes to their passion, their interest in various different ways. My story is unique. I mean, in at least I think it is unique for where I was and how I've come to be where I am today. With regards to my interest in, say, linguistics.
Sure.
I didn't know what that was. I really didn't. Not in high school, and I didn't discover what linguistics was until the second year of undergrad. Now, at Michigan State, I was going into English education with full plans of becoming an English teacher, looking to teach in a high school. I enjoyed English grammar. I enjoyed some of the literature that was involved, but my real passion was the grammatical structures of English. And I wanted to come back to the UP. With that said, though, upon taking some English classes on grammar, I also was encouraged to take linguistics courses. At the time, it was the one that would really pique my interest was one taught by Dr. Dennis Preston at the time. He's no longer there at Michigan State, but he taught an American dialects course.
Okay.
And in that course, I fell in love with the various topics of linguistics as it pertains to sociolinguistics.
Sure.
Okay. And in that particular class, there was an opportunity to do a final project, a research project. It was following very research methods applied in sociolinguistics, and I didn't know anything about sociolinguistics at the time. All I knew that I found what the content was extremely fascinating to me, and so I started doing research, a research project on UP vowels. I interviewed 10 people in the Marquette County, just kind of sampling the population.
Okay.
Nobody had done like a vowel study.
Sure.
And so so Dennis suggested that was a great idea, and so I did that. Results were unconclusive, but it was it was what it was.
Yeah.
So I was interested in it still, and so I continued to do research under him. As an undergrad, I collected over 130 interviews from Marquette County, which would later become the corpus for my dissertation at Indiana University. That class was the pivotal point of my career. I mean,
sure.
Essentially,
Sure.
it directed me toward what I'm doing today.
Yeah, and that's an awesome segue because you're doing some really cool stuff that's tied directly to the UP. Let's talk first about the SANA survey.
Yes.
Because that is actually how you and I first met. So about a year ago, I had gotten contacted by Wil, for everybody listening at home, asking me if I would sit down and chat with him about my Wise for Yooper book, and particularly the S's for SANA page. And we'll kind of dive into that a little bit more here, but why don't you explain to everybody what specifically what the SANA survey was?
Okay, before I talk about the SANA survey, there was the reason why the SANA survey was created was because I was doing a much larger study called the How Michiganders Talk in the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah.
The short title was UP Talk. In collecting interviews, about 150 interviews across the UP at 6 different counties, from Sault Ste. Marie and Chippewa County all the way to the Houghton County, in Houghton Hancock. All these different areas, there was a task that was that participants had to do in their interview, and that task was a passage called "A Bad Day for a Sauna" or a sauna.
Right.
Well, they read the task. There was multiple tokens of sauna or sauna in there, and I started to hear various productions of that particular word.
Sure.
And it was very obvious to me right off the bat when I started interviewing people in Sault Ste. Marie. I heard sauna and I heard sauna, which I was like, okay, well, these guys are from the East Coast, on the east side of the UP, so I'll cut them some slack. Maybe we got some Lower Peninsula influence, maybe some Canadian influence. Okay.
Yeah.
But then I went to Dickinson County, where in Iron Mountain, and started hearing more sauna instead of sauna. You heard some saunas as well. Now, being from Marquette County, I knew that predominantly nobody would say sauna in the Marquette County.
Absolutely.
I mean, I grew up with that, and I had my previous thoughts were that was true as well. I went to, and I was confirmed by collecting a good sample in that particular population. Same thing I found in Houghton County as well as the Gogebic County.
Okay.
So the question is, what is going on with this particular, we call lexical item or vocabulary? How is it pronounced? And not only how is it pronounced differently across the UP, but what are the attitudes and beliefs of that? Because I interviewed some individuals, and they would from the Sault Ste. Marie area or from the Dickinson County area, Iron Mountain, Kingsford area, and the people that would say sauna, I often ask them, or even without asking them, they would volunteer the fact that, well, I used to say sauna, but I was told by a best friend, somebody
was probably a Finlander.
Somebody was a Finlander, or somebody from the west side of the UP.
Right.
Now, west or north central areas of the UP. And they were convinced to produce it as the Finnish pronunciation.
Sure. So
that was the impetus for me to go out and create the online survey, the sauna survey.
Okay. It's funny because, and you can tell then that this is just a conversation with you and I. I've not really scripted this out because I thought it was vice versa. Yeah. I thought you had done the sauna survey and then kind of did your how Yooper's Talk survey flipped around. So,
in fact, what happened was I created the sauna survey halfway in the middle of the summer last summer, because I got through Sault Ste. Marie and my brain started turning. All right?
Sure.
And I observed this, and the production data from this UP Talk study is going to be very good data, very useful data. But I wanted something that I could sample a much larger population, not just the UP, but northern Wisconsin, parts of Minnesota, lower Michigan.
Yeah.
What's going on, not just in the UP, but neighboring areas as well. And that's why the sauna survey was needed, because I knew people were very much aware of this pronunciation, particularly in the UP and neighboring areas of the UP. But while the UP Talk study was one of the largest studies to actually do interviews, the sauna survey had a much larger breadth and was able to get more respondents. In fact, we had got over 2,000 respondents for that particular survey. Yes, it was. Okay. And that's excellent for that sort of survey.
It is. And so that was where I kind of came into play. I had alluded to my Why is for Yooper book, and I don't want to call it a controversy because it really wasn't. But when I initially had released the book, the S is for sauna page, and I'm going to say sauna because that's just how I talk. I'm not going to try and use a pronunciation that isn't what I'm accustomed to. I put the phonetic spelling or help on the page for a child to help them sound the word out, and I put SAW-NA, saw na. And not long after the book had been out, I started getting some emails or comments from people that, hey, you have the pronunciation of sauna wrong in your book. It should be sauna, should be SAW-NA. And at first, I just kind of brushed it off, and it was just one or two, possibly couldn't be that many. Well, then it turned into a lot more, and I found out that people wanted to return the book just because this phonetic spelling in the book was wrong, and I was flabbergasted. But particularly those were coming from, like you said, the western half of the UP, the northern half of getting into Houghton County, and kind of the central northern from kind of the region that we're in now.
Marquette County.
Yeah, Marquette County particularly is where that was coming from. So I find it interesting that not only with the sauna study, but also in your Yooper Talk study, I know that's not the exact name, but that's just the name that I'll use.
Sure.
That you find regions, basically, regional differences throughout the UP.
So specifically, what the sauna survey revealed was that higher percentages of sauna pronunciation was found in the western side, the north, as well as the north central. So the just south central, which would be Dickinson County roughly, that was heavy sauna users, okay? However, if you go further east, say where Escanaba and Gladstone is, now you're starting to get more variation there. There was actually, from the sauna survey, it revealed that that was a hotbed for controversy between sauna and sauna. Whereas, say, Dickinson County, there wasn't really much of a controversy. It's much more sauna-based. You just go a little north of there, we have Marquette County, heavy sauna users. Now you go even further east, we go, say, Sault Ste. Marie area, Luce County, any other, St. Ignace area, they were much more sauna users, but there was still variation. The question is, why so much variation?
Absolutely. That is a really good question.
It is. And that is likely due to the pockets of Finnish Americans in certain areas. For example, there are pockets of strong Finnish Americans that really latch on to the sauna pronunciation of the word in the Escanaba area or in Gladstone area, as well as the Chippewa area, not in Sault Ste. Marie exactly, but Kinross, for example.
Oh, okay. Sure.
So and you see certain pockets of Finnish populations in other counties and other areas, but unless they have maintained that cultural pride, that relevance, and being proud of being of their Finnish heritage and willing to stand up and use that Finnish pronunciation, oftentimes the sauna pronunciation wins out because that is the Americanized pronunciation of that particular word.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I grew up in Kingsford and always just said sauna. So to me, that was just second nature. And at first I kind of found it comical when someone would tell me you're saying it wrong, because to me it's not a question of right or wrong. It more goes to the question of heritage and dialect and that sort of thing. So I found that really interesting, and I don't so much get comments on it anymore. Although I will say, in order to curb the controversy, I did change in the page in my book to the SAW-NA. It goes back to the people that felt strongly about it were more so the people that pronounce it sauna. The people that say sauna could have cared less how I had it in the book.
That's a great point that you made. So in that sauna survey, we got to do, say, a multiple choice question where they had to, how would you pronounce this particular word? S-A-U-N-A. Okay. they choose one of the options that they had, or they could provide me an alternative pronunciation. But there were other questions on that survey as well. Those were attitudinal questions, getting after questions like, how strongly do you feel about the pronunciation of this particular word, or how important is this word to you, in terms of your identity.
Sure.
Well, what we found was that people that had that chose the Sana pronunciation, the Americanized, anglicized pronunciation, were not willing to defend that pronunciation. They were less willing to defend that pronunciation with regards to, say, an individual conversation.
Sure.
If that controversy, so to speak, came up, they would not defend their stance necessarily. And they certainly would not do it. They would do it even less when confronted by a group of individuals.
Sure.
What's interesting is that the Finnish pronunciation, those that chose that option, they would defend it on an individual basis, but even more impressively, they were very adamant that they would defend it in a group of individuals, even if they were the only one. So that right there speaks to sort of the strength at which users of a particular linguistic variable, in this case, the Sana pronunciation of the word Sauna, that sort of directs and shows you why certain pronunciations are maintained in certain areas and potentially weakened in other areas.
Sure. So with the Yooper Talk study, did you basically kind of end up breaking down the regions almost like as you and I have been talking about this Sana survey, we've kind of basically said, well, Eastern, Central, Western, Northern, and kind of North Central. Did you find with the Yooper Talk study that those regions kind of are broken down the same, or?
Yes. So for the production side, for the data that I had available last summer, I presented at a couple of conferences related to this particular topic, triangulating three sources of data: the Sauna survey data, the Yooper Talk study production data from the passage task, bad day for a sauna, and then the Facebook comments that were obtained when I posted the Sauna survey, and people voluntarily gave input.
Oh yeah.
Lots of comments in various different forums with regards to that survey.
Sure.
So I triangulated three different sources, and what I found was exactly that. The production data for the Sauna survey it confirmed and supported the Sauna survey results, and the comments in the different Facebook group posts were also supporting that.
Okay. Have you found any other, I guess, differences amongst the different regions in the UP as far as things that might be used, words used in vocabulary or different things that?
One thing I want to talk on first before I jump into that real quick, because the sauna controversy is one that we need to make sure that we talk about because a lot of people have very strong opinions about how it should be pronounced, and
Sure.
the right and wrong, you touched on that, and I want to make sure we go after the whole point of, well, it's a Finnish word, so it should be pronounced the Finnish way, or we're in America, we're producing American English, it should be produced in the Americanized way. These are two arguments, and people think of this as a controversy, and they're right, regardless if you're a sauna user or a sauna user.
Sure.
That's why it's a controversy, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're exactly right in stating that there is no right or wrong. It's not about right or wrong. It's about showing how a particular way of speaking and how people identify is used and shaped by the way we use language. And so part of being in the UP, a big portion of that population is heavily influenced by the Finnish population. Huge immigrant populations came, but they came to specific regions, and they were most concentrated on the west, on the north, and on the north central.
Sure.
There were other Finnish populations across the UP, but that area was heavily influenced, and that today is still being maintained by generational Finnish Americans.
Absolutely.
And so that right there is sort of a means for the sauna pronunciation to still be maintained and to be taken hold, and that's a good thing because it's perpetuating a certain identity. But at the same time, there is the other pronunciation, the anglicized variation, still also indexes a certain identity. People that use the anglicized sauna pronunciation still view themselves as a Yooper.
Sure.
It's still tied to their identity, not the pronunciation per se, but the cultural activity of it.
You hit the nail on the head. I can remember responding to people at first or emails, and I would say, no matter how I pronounce the word, I'm still a Yooper.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Kingsford, and I'm still a Yooper no matter how I pronounce it.
Yeah. And that's perfectly the cultural artifact and the relevance of taking a sauna or a sauna, regardless of how you pronounce it, is part of our culture across the UP and to varying degrees. But to the greater point, it is part of our culture. The pronunciation is where we get some debate, and that is healthy because it maintains identity across a particular community that is not homogeneic. It's not all the same.
Sure.
There is variation. There's differences in different ways in which people think about each other.
Yeah. You touched on a little bit, you were talking about maintaining that cultural heritage, and those areas that predominantly we see a higher Finnish population is undoubtedly because of the mining and the jobs and driving that culture to those areas. I remember reading an article, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it was in regards to the dialect of Finnish that gets spoken north of basically the bridge in Houghton, and that tourists from Finland travel there essentially to hear Finnish in a way that their ancestors would have spoken it. Can you touch on that a little bit? I don't know how much you're...
That's a really great topic, and I get this sort of question often when I give talks at local talks. And so first I want to talk about language and how the basic tenets of language. So language changes like anything else. We can always depend on change.
Sure.
That's sort of a life tenet, right? But because language is produced by individuals as a tool for communication or for self-expression, language changes. You can look at the historical relevance of Beowulf, Old English, Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales, Shakespeare, early modern English, or we can look at today's English. All of that is the historical development of English, and English has changed. That actually was probably the most conservative form of English at the time, be it Beowulf, Chaucer, Shakespeare, or
Sure.
pick your favorite author.
Right.
But one thing that we know for sure is that language changes, and one thing about change is that if we have communities of individuals who differ in terms of their geographic development, if they're developing in different areas and they're in isolation, they will, at one point, maybe they spoke the same language, but over time, if they're isolated, they will start to develop differences in the way they produce language. Sure. In different ways. It's like being on the straight line and then hitting a fork in the road. Some of us will go one path, some of us will go the other path, and we branch off. Each path may develop in different rates. Some may be faster in their change. Some might be slower in their change. Some might have very different changes as they go down their path. Language is no different in terms of how communities develop. For example, another example, Latin was a language no longer spoken by any native speakers, but it developed into dialects, mutually intelligible language varieties, meaning people could understand each other, but it was like regional varieties in the United States: Southern English, Texan English, Eastern English, Midwestern English. But then those dialects of Latin turned into different languages.
Sure.
Catalan, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, all those different languages. So that's just kind of giving you a little bit of a historical relevance of language and how that's a basic fact of language. Now with Finnish is no different. It actually has a lot of different dialects, regional dialects in Finland. What we find that with regards to those that came from Finland to the United States, they came from a particular region, Ostrobothnia area. It's basically the west central region of Finland.
Okay.
Now, that particular region has a unique dialect, a unique way of speaking. And when people migrated did a huge, there was actually 2 waves going from Finland to the United States from 1880s to the 1910s. 2 big waves came in and during that period, and then the doors were shut. We didn't get much. Back and forth. There was those that went there. They did come back. Some did come back, but a good portion of that population stayed there, and they did not travel back to Finland, or as well as Finns that were in Finland did not try to come back to the United States, mainly because of policy regulations and different things like that. Immigration was shut off by 1917, something
Sure.
along those terms.
Sure.
Anyway, so what happened is that you have a situation where we have a fork in the road. We have Finns in Finland, and you have Finns in the United States. Now, those that were in the United States, they were encouraged to Americanize. Mm-hmm. Now they were resistant to that. They tried to maintain their linguistic practices by opening up Finnish newspapers, businesses.
Yep.
They formed very close-knit, internally focused communities to try to maintain their linguistic practices. When communities do that, they're much slower to try to change their language, and so language changes slowly. But those Finns that did not go to the United States and stayed in Finland were using language in very dynamic ways, and that change was happening at a faster rate.
Sure.
And so, fast forward to present day, we are looking at younger Finns that travel to the UP. Maybe they're in the 30s, 40s, maybe 20s, and they're listening to the people speak Finnish here in the Keweenaw, and they reflect on how it sounds very archaic. Well, it's because the change that has happened, though there has been change that in the Finnish communities in the Keweenaw, that they've tried to hold on to that way of speaking when their grandparents or great grandparents came over.
Okay, that's super interesting.
Sorry, I don't mean to give a huge historical context.
And that's what we're here for, is to have these types of conversations. I feel like I could almost spend an hour just talking about just that alone. But so back to your Yooper Talk study and some of the different words that actually get used in different parts of the UP that's almost regional to specific areas. The first thing that I just kind of think of is I received an email from somebody that had never, believe they were from the Bessemer area, they had never heard the word chook for a winter hat before, which coming from that region, it really kind of surprised me. Now, maybe in that small pocket or community that they lived, maybe that word wasn't necessarily used or part of the lexicon, but I found it really interesting. And then I started thinking, well, what other words out there that maybe get used up in Houghton that don't get used in Marquette, or get used in the Sioux that don't get used in Escanaba? Did you find any of that in your study, certain words?
So, chook is a great example of a particular word that has changed over time. Now, that one is one that is starting to be perceived or recognized less and less by the younger population. Mm-hmm. With that said, though, it still is in use in certain areas more than others. But also, you have to think about, I have to ask you a follow-up question with regards to this. It was an email, correct?
Yes.
When they wrote that word, how did they spell it?
CHOOK.
Okay. And where did they see it? Did they say that?
In my book.
Okay, good.
Because that was how I had spelled it.
All right, good, wonderful. All right, so in many areas, there is a lot of controversy in terms of how that should be spelled.
Sure.
And if you ask somebody from, say, Sault Ste. Marie, they will not recognize that word. I have that in one of the items that I look at in terms of the Yooper Talk study, and categorically, people from Sault Ste. Marie, even Newberry, did not recognize that term. They looked at it and they just didn't understand it. On the flip side, when I went to Ironwood, for example, which is not far from Bessemer, which is interesting.
Right.
They were very supportive of that term, but not as much as, say, the Houghton area or Marquette area. Those two areas are heavy chook users. You see that very often, which is really interesting. But what is even more fascinating is the etymology of that word. The actual history of that word. It was originally spelled TOQUE.
Right.
Yes.
French Canadian.
Yes,
correct?
French Canadian. Yeah, that's exactly it.
A toque.
A toque, exactly, but has turned into a chook.
Yeah.
In terms of UP English. So that's a really unique. Once I mentioned that in Sault Ste. Marie, they were like, "Oh yeah, I know what that is."
Yeah.
But not how it was orthographically or how it was written.
Sure. The other word I think of is pank.
Pank, great.
To pank down the snow on a ski hill.
Yep. And that's really a west-east side distinction as well. The Sault Ste. Marie area, Newberry area, did not recognize pank. They have no idea what pank is, unless, of course, they studied or had spent some time on the east or on the west side of the UP. At that point, then they probably were introduced to it, particularly, again, in the Gogebic area. And what was really fascinating in the Facebook posts, and when I was talking with people, more than any other location, the Gogebic area, people were talking about pank it was a salient, very obvious feature of our way of speaking here.
Yeah.
And so they were very proud that we know what this word means, and we're willing to support it and push it as a feature of our way of speaking. So it was just an identity marker, so to speak. But the Houghton area also in Marquette County are also heavy pank users, but not as much for the younger generation. Fewer and fewer people of the younger generations are aware of what panking or what pank means.
I think that's probably directly tied into ski jumping culture.
That is correct.
Less and less younger people are ski jumping, where it was way more common back in the day.
I could not agree more. I mean, that's essentially that's the historical origin of that word, but also, the fact that ski jumping has fallen out of practice. I mean, it's still present here in the Marquette County, for example, but it's not as strong as it once was.
Absolutely. What about A? Let's talk about A for a minute, eh?
Yeah, A is a ubiquitous feature of what we think of as UP English. You see this on bumper stickers. You see this in pop cultural representations of the UP accent or UP way of speaking. And when we leave the UP, people often comment on that. They'll say, "Are you from Canada?" Because they hear us say "a," and we do this without even thinking we're doing it. No, that's good and bad in various different ways, or maybe it's neither. It's just what it is. People associating us with Canadians. If you ask anybody in the UP, most of us would hesitate to suggest that we sound Canadian, because we can tell when we're talking to a Yooper or from somebody from Canada. Usually, not everybody, but most people would agree with that, I think. And most Canadians would say, well, Yoopers don't really sound like us.
Absolutely.
Okay. That brings us back to this, A feature. Then do we use it just like Canadians? Actually, no. There is some preliminary research that's been done for grad students. Grad student at Michigan Tech has looked at this particular feature and has shown with convincing arguments that there is subtle variation in terms of subtle differences in which we use A differently than how it is used in Canada. Also, we have two pronunciations of A. It's hey or A, and they're the exact same thing. They're just two pronunciations, just like sauna and asana.
Oh yeah. I was gonna get to that or comment on that because I'm a hey person, and when I went to school at Central Michigan University, I feel like people picked up on it right away. Oh, yeah. I would say something to someone who I didn't know, and the first thing they would say is, "Where are you from?" Because you talk funny, and the second thing is, I would say a sentence and they would go, "Yeah, hey." And I, like, to the point where I didn't even hear myself saying it because it just comes out. But yeah, I'm definitely a hey person.
How did that make you feel? When they sort of mocked you or made fun of you in that regard?
Definitely defensive.
Yeah.
But in a strange way, proud.
So using that particular feature was a way of, or being recognized in using that feature was a way of marking you as being a Yooper, which can be has very strong positive connotations to you.
Absolutely. Excellent. So I used it as a catalyst to talk about, here's the awesome place that I'm from.
Excellent.
Type of. I guess that's how I always approached it, because I've never been ashamed to be a Yooper. I've always been fiercely proud of of calling this place home. So anytime I received any sort of pushback, I was carrying the flag.
Yeah, no, and that's oftentimes the case. You get one of two responses, though. When we go downstate or we go somewhere else, people will make associations. Where are you from? Or if they do call us a Yooper or refer to the UP, that can be one of two things usually. It can be a point of, oh, that's really neat. That's really an awesome place to be. It's really neat that you're there. Or, oh, you're from the UP, with some sort of negative connotation attached to that tone.
Sure.
And that kind of gets after this notion of the term Yooper and how it has positive and negative connotations from some people. For some people, as well as some people are indifferent regardless. They don't really care, but usually it's one or the other. It's positive or negative connotations. For most people in the UP, currently it has transformed into very positive connotations, but that wasn't always the case.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because I was going to mention that. I believe the term was really kind of first used in the 70s, correct?
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
And so
more of a pejorative term. It's some way to refer to, say, somebody that is uneducated, uncultured, uncouth, does certain particular activities in their recreational time.
Sure.
Very rustic. That's usually the way it was referred to.
Sure.
And many older individuals that I've interviewed have actually, they are the only ones that have ever voiced to me that negative connotation attached to that word. I've actually had some very strong feelings about not using that term. They saw it as a slur.
Yes.
Now, the younger generation and many of the middle and older generation have shifted toward looking at that term and using the term in a more positive way. Some people disagree with how it is used or portrayed in pop culture. Some find that you got to have a sense of humor, so it's fine. Others are just all on board with that term and really celebrate it. But again, that's us as insiders in our community. We have now recasted that term to have positive connotations. But if you go downstate and somebody refers to that term in a negative way, it can still have negative connotations.
Absolutely.
I was asked when I was downstate, when I first got down there, the first year I was there in the dorms, people found out I was from the UP and they asked me, do I have color TV up there? And I literally thought they were joking. And then I realized they weren't joking, and I was shocked. I didn't realize, I didn't grow up with those negative connotations.
Sure.
But I definitely felt them when I was down there.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I never got that question, but I certainly got, how do you guys get around from like point A to point B? And they were dead serious. And so I kind of jokingly said, well, in the winter, it's strictly snowmobiles because there's too much snow for the horses. But at spring, summer, and fall, it's strictly just horseback. And
did you correct them on that, or did you just let them suffer?
For a minute, they kind of like gave me like that wide-eyed look, and I said, excellent. No, you can take cars north of the Mackinac Bridge. There's plenty of roads to go around. I can show you the scenic stretch if you want to see.
you got to be careful with that, because they may just go to the Mackinac Island and think that's all they have there is horses.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And generalize to the entire UP. That's not the case. That's not the case.
That's true. So to kind of come full circle here just a little bit, so you've got this summer linguistic lecture series that's kind of going on. Do you want to touch a little bit about what you've got going on this summer?
Yeah, so I am being sponsored by the Literacy Legacy Fund of Michigan. They have been very supportive in trying to get sort of the linguistic knowledge as well as features of what it means to speak UP talk across the UP. And so what I'm doing with their support is going around and giving about a 60-minute talk and with a 30-minute afterward discussion of what are some basic tenets, linguistic principles that language, how language is and what it is not. And then we talk about UP features that are unique and definitive, as well as some features that we may not be aware that is part of our way of speaking. It happens below our conscious awareness, yet people from outside the area are picking up on it.
Interesting. That's really, really interesting. So what are some of the dates or places that you're going to be then for the series? Yeah,
so I've already given 2 talks, one in Iron Mountain as well as one in Marquette. Actually, there was 2 sessions in Marquette. Both were enormously successful. I had about just under 100 attendees for both talks, so it was
excellent. Yeah.
It was really great. The venues were at the historic Braumart Theater in Iron Mountain as well.
I grew up watching movies at the Braumart Theater.
It is a wonderful facility. They're trying to renovate it and continually upgrade it. It's great as it is, but continual renovation and trying to maintain the historical relevance is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Also, the venue in Marquette was at the Peter White Public Library.
Sure.
That was it was a repeat of the previous summer, but it was a great turnout and a good talk.
Excellent.
The other 2 talks, one is going to be tomorrow in Sault Ste. Marie at the Lake Superior State University, and the other is on the 12th, the day after tomorrow, and that'll be in the Ironwood Carnegie Library in Ironwood.
Excellent. So in the 2 talks that you've had prior, during the discussion sessions, have you pretty much hit the things that we've been talking about, or have there been some other things that have come up in the discussion that we haven't really touched on?
You've touched on a lot of the good questions that have often popped up during those sorts of discussions, but of course there are always unique questions that pop up that we didn't cover today, or I hadn't heard ever asked in a sort of a local venue talk like that. That's what makes discussion sections or discussion portions of these talks so enjoyable, at least for me, and I think most people find that extremely enjoyable, because most of these questions that are being asked are ones that we have all thought about at one point or another in different conversations, but it gives you a venue to talk about it and potentially get your questions answered.
Sure. So I have one final question for you then. Ketchup or gravy on your pasty?
That's excellent. So I might get a pasty thrown at me here. I'm a ketchup user.
You're a ketchup user?
I've always been a ketchup user. However, I have tried gravy. It is delicious.
It is.
But then I've also done it alone, gone it alone. There's not always one or the other. You can also do just regular.
That's very true. Bugsy, who was on here last, he said he prefers nothing at all on it. He threw me for a major curveball. He said the only condiment he ever really uses or has used and enjoyed is there's like a jalapeno ketchup that's like got some zing to it.
Yep. If you like a little spice, that's always a good one.
I never didn't even know it existed. So
you got to keep your mind open, right? You got to keep your mind open. I will say though that I was told by a real Finnish individual, I will just leave it at that, tell me that the true Finnish way to do this, and it's Cornish, right? It's a Cornish pasty.
Yes, it is Cornish.
But he told me, he's like, the real Finnish way to do this is to eat it with nothing else, with nothing at all.
Yeah.
Just plain.
Yeah.
And I hey, okay.
Well, I got to say this has been an awesome chat. I feel like I said before, where I feel like I could talk for different topics for like an hour for each one separately. But I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about not only some of the differences across the UP, but obviously some commonality. We're one big happy family here from Sault Ste. Marie all the way over to Ontonagon and everywhere in between.
A big happy family with differences.
Yeah.
Subtle as they may be, but there are differences.
So is there anything else that you'd want to add or say or state before we kind of wrap things up here?
Well, I mean, if you haven't gone to one of the talks, please do so. They're free. And if you don't make it to any of the talks this summer, I make it a priority to be able to make my research, or try to make my research, accessible to the local community that, have made the research that I do possible. I can't do what I do as a passion, as a hobby, as part of something, as a part of my job, without the support of the community. So that's my way of kind of giving back to the community, to do these local talks. But also, I from time to time, and I'm actually going to be submitting an article for the Market Monthly, should be coming sometime this fall, that touches on the things that we talked about during these talks this summer.
Excellent. Well, Wil, thank you again for sitting down and chatting it up with me. And you always, it seems like you've got something new on the horizon, or something that you're working on. So this might not be the only time that you and I sit down and chat, but
I'd love to come back again.
Awesome.
And thank you for the coffee.
You're welcome. All right. Thanks, Wil. Okay, that's going to wrap things up here for episode 2 of Chat It Up. A few takeaways from my interview with Wil. The first one is anytime I've chatted with him, I'm always super impressed with just how passionate he is about what he does, and the fact that he's able to make the focus of that passion the Upper Peninsula. I just think that that's really cool, and it's something that I find admirable. My other big takeaway from chatting with Wil is that it's obvious from all of the data that he has is that the communities throughout the UP definitely have differences, especially in the way that we communicate and use language. And to me, that's okay. Those differences are what make our communities unique. And to me, that's something that should be celebrated. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how you pronounce any of these words or different things that we associate with Yooper culture. The important thing is that we're passionate about our Yooper culture and our heritage and our communities, because at the end of the day, those are the things that are really important. Just a few housekeeping things here. The first is, please give me a rating on iTunes, or if you're listening on SoundCloud, give me a like, leave a comment. Please leave comments on iTunes as well. Please give me 5 stars if you feel so inclined. That between that and the comments, that's really how their rating system works, and that's how this grows and can spread. Please let all of your family and friends know if you think somebody would like listening to this. I've been having a blast doing it, and all the comments and everything so far have been super positive. So I'm going to continue pumping out episodes as long as I'm continuing to have as much fun as I am. So one last thing, I just want to give a special shout out to my buddies Brandon Erkla and Jake Harkins. They are the co-hosts of the Agonizing Audio Hour podcast. If you're a huge fan of music and you love lyrics and different things like that, I highly suggest you give their podcast a listen. They're doing some really fun stuff there, and really they're the inspiration for me to start this podcast. Seeing 2 friends of mine do it and do it well has definitely been a motivator for me to pick up the microphone and see if I could do this myself. So again, it's the Agonizing Audio Hour podcast, so please give them a listen, check them out. Like I said, they're doing some really cool stuff. So that pretty much wraps things up here. Again, thank you all for tuning in, and keep your chin up and your eyes forward.